Section number 6, literary aviary, AVIARY. It's a enclosure for birds. So subtitle for poetical plumagery. Plumage means feathers. So let's look at some of the best poems and birds represented in literature. So we have the madman, who is often called Mad Shelley. So P.B. Shelley's poem, Ode to a Skylark. So he calls that bird blithe spirit, a happy bird, blithe spirit, which inspires him. And let's read these lines. We look before and after and pine for what is not. Our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. One of the most beautiful lines written during the Romantic age. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. Sometimes we seem happy, or we have to look happy for others, like a comedian or like a teacher or a lecturer. Yes, we go to class, we forget things, we tell tales, we look happy. But there are sad things, there are a lot of things happening to them, but they have to put everything aside and deliver the lecture. Let's go to the next one. So we have Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the Nightingale. He calls this the most musical bird. What happens in this poem? We have Samuel Taylor Coleridge and we have Wordsworth and Wordsworth's sister Dorothy. The three, they are all friends. They go, and the person of the poem or speaker of the poem or Coleridge himself, he talks about Nightingale. How people generally associate this bird with melancholy, sadness. But the writer says, or the persona says, no, this bird cannot represent melancholy. It represents happiness. People misunderstand this bird because they associate Nightingale with a character. Anyone remembers that Greek character who was kidnapped and raped, and she was turned into a bird, which is a famous story about a king and his wife, and the wife has a sister, and the king goes and get the sister back so that his wife can be happy. But on the way back, he falls in love with that girl, sister, and he abducts her and he cuts off her tongue. He tortures her.
Philomela.
Yes, you got that?
Philomela.
Yes, Philomela. So whenever we think of Nightingale, we think of Philomela and her tragic story, because she was turned into a nightingale in one version. In another version, she is turned into some other bird. So whenever we think of Nightingale, we think of that sad incident, right? But Coleridge says, don't do that, because we read such things into this beautiful bird. It's not melancholy at all. So that's his contention, because in nature, nothing can be melancholic. So that's one. And hark, the nightingale begins its song. Most musical, most melancholy bird. A melancholy bird, oh, idle thought. He doesn't believe that. In nature, there is nothing melancholy. But some night-wandering man whose heart was pierced with the remembrance of a grievous wrong. Maybe someone who faced injustice, maybe a person who wants to take revenge, maybe that kind of a person can see melancholy in this bird. Otherwise, there is no melancholy in this bird, which is the most musical bird. And towards the end of this poem, he addresses his son, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Hartley Coleridge, his son. He also addresses his son in another poem. All right. So this poem is a famous one. A babe is actually talking about his son. He wants his son to appreciate this song and enjoy this song, Hartley Coleridge. Okay. So we'll go to the next one. Now, yes, when we talk about birds, we should talk about Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, one of my favorite poems of all time. Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. So whenever I read this poem, I find myself in this poem, and I want to come up with a different interpretation. So while I was reading this poem, I was also reading Poe's another short story, The Pit and the Pendulum. The Pit and the Pendulum is all about a torture chamber in which we have a sharp razor coming down and down, by and by, and it's a torture chamber. There is a person who is strapped to the board at the bottom, and he suffers because every time the pendulum, which has a sharp edge, knife edge, which swings here and there, and it lowers, it comes down, down and down. So the person who is strapped to that board or the chamber is anxious. He wants to die quickly, but this is a torture because he knows he's going to die. But this is eternal torture, right? But anyway, in that short story, he escapes at the end. But when we read that, I think we can interpret the raven in a different way. We know the story of the raven. So we already looked at Rossetti's poem, The Blessed Damsel, right, which is inspired from this poem. So what happens in this poem? We have a student, a scholar who has lost his lady love. Now he's trying to study, who is in his study chamber, study room, and winter outside, it's rainy, and comes a bird, the raven, and he tries to get some answer from the raven, because raven is a bird from the hill, right, from Hades. So that's a myth we have. So we also have a god called Odin, Odin, from whose name we get the word Wednesday, Odin. Then we get the word Wednesday from this name. So Odin had ravens. Maybe that ravens inspired Poe, and that's a symbolic meaning here. So what happens? The raven comes, it sits on the pallas of Athena. The pallas of Athena, I mean, she represents wisdom. Whereas this bird, which is black in color, whereas Pallas Athena, the bust, it is made of marble, which is white in color. So we have the visual contrast, white and black. And symbolically, Pallas of Athena represents wisdom, whereas this bird represents kind of not wisdom, not ignorance, to kind of a superstition. So we have the persona, the scholar whose lady love is dead, who is no more. So he believes in superstition. Like Dr. Faustus, he tries to read, books on necromancy. So that's how the poem starts. Then we understand, actually, is torturing himself. He can't come to terms with the death of his lady love. Maybe we can understand this feeling if someone ditches you, or someone we love so much, and they go back on their words and say, no, I don't love you. Actually, I said something else, sorry. And we get that, then we feel, oh my God, it's a kind of a betrayal. And the same thing here, the premature death of the lady love is a betrayal, and a kind of a survivor's guilt here. And he speaks to the raven. Maybe we don't know whether there is a real raven there, or it's his own imagination, or a kind of hallucination. We don't know, but that's a torture. Then we understand the raven functions like the Grand Inquisitor. Who is a grand, or who was a Grand Inquisitor? A kind of a judge during Inquisition, Spanish Inquisition, the darkest period in Christianity, where one who goes against God, one who talks ill about God, or one who follows other religions, they are burned to death, right? At stake, burned at the stake. So that's a dark period. So they had a judge, and the name of the judge is the Grand Inquisitor, right? So the raven, I would say, functions like the Grand Inquisitor, right? It has to pass judgment. And we understand here is a case, and maybe we have the student, right? Now, his case, he wants to know about Lenore. his dead love, who is dead. He wants to know something about her because he thinks the raven can give some or solace, some consolation, right? So look at the description here. So it's more like a summoning, as if he is summoned to the court, all right, by the raven, the inquisitor, as though summoned to stand trial for the premature death of his beloved Lenore. The lover wheels a cushioned seat in front of the bird and sinks into it. So this is more of a court scene. And look at the bird. The bird is sitting on the top of a bust of Pallas Athena. So the raven is more of a grand inquisitor, a judge. Now we have a criminal, one who survived the death of his lady love. All right. Now there's a case. So what's the judgment? So I would say this is the judgment. Self-torture. So that's his punishment, like the suffering went through by the ancient mariner. So you can read this short story and this poem parallelly. You can do a parallel reading of, I would say, a post Pit and Pendulum on one side. On the other side, you can read The Raven. Then you can come up with an interesting interpretation. I came up with this, I would say I stumbled upon this interpretation. So I thought I should capture this in a single sentence. And as you know, you can look at the picture, look at on the right side, we have a picture, a famous picture, where a raven is sitting on the top of Pallas Athena, behind which we have a light. And the shadow of the raven falls on, we have the student or the lover. And that is the end of the poem. The shadow engulfs the entire thing. In the sense, he can't come out of his despair, right? He's so much into his despair, the loss of love. He can't come out of his grief. So he's torturing himself. He has built a torture chamber for himself in his own mind. So I think that's the essence of this poem. And let me try to convey that in a single sentence. Okay. So I would say, what is the judgment given by the raven? Only one word sentence. Sentence here means punishment, right? Word sentence, it's a word play. The one word sentence, nevermore. You'll never get relief in your life. Or there are a lot of meanings. A refrain which comes again and again, and it has a lot of meanings. So let's read the sentence. The one word sentence, nevermore, accentuates the sorrows of lost love by continually dissenting. In the sense, we can compare that one word. The one word is more like a razor blade, the swinging pendulum in the tail, Pit and the Pendulum. So it comes down again and again because the bird utters that one word again and again and again, repetition. Similar way, in the tail, we have the pendulum coming down, swinging sharp, down and down. Each time it comes down, there's pain. Similar way, each time the bird utters nevermore, rhyming with Lenore, then there is some problem. So like a razor sharp pendulum upon the lover who is strapped, like in this story, the prisoner is strapped, right, to that bird. Here, the lover is strapped to his memory of the dead maiden and confined to his chamber of unending despair. I would say the poem is all about self-torture. The lover couldn't come to terms with the loss of his lady love. Okay, so with this, we'll go to the next one. Another representation, when we think of birds, or when we think of representation of birds or animals in literature, definitely we think of the British poet Ted Hughes, whom we call the animal poet. And one of his famous poem, Hawk Roosting. Roosting in the sense you rule, a ruler. So here is a bird which acts like a tyrant. It says, the sun is behind me, in the sense I'm more, I'm more powerful than the sun itself. The sun is behind me. Nothing has changed since I began. My eye has permitted no change. I'm going to keep things like this. So here the hawk behaves like a tyrant and a king, right? Next. But on the other hand, so when we think of the animal poet Tetius, we can also think of the Canadian poet E.J. Pratt. I would say he is also an animal poet with a difference in the sense when we read E.J. Pratt's poem, he not only talks about the animal world, he also talks about the clash between the animal world and the machine world. The world of the machines clashes with the world of animals, birds. And maybe in order to understand this, let's look at this poem, Dying Eagle. So like Tedious' hawk, here is a tyrant, a monarch. We have an eagle, but it's old. Now he has a competitor, an invader. The eagle says, the eagle stared at the invader, marked the strange bat-like shadow moving in leagues over the roofs of the world, across the passes and moraines, darkening the vitriol blue of the mountain lakes. See, so far his rule, no one questioned his rule. He is a monarch of all he sees. But what happens? Today something happened. Someone, a kind of an invader who passed through his territory or territory in American pronunciation. So he's a territory or territory. And the thing is, it didn't stop and salute this monarch. It just went through the territory. He is insulted and he feels sad. His monarchy is questioned, his power is questioned. Now this dying monarch feels sad because here is an invader who is more powerful than himself. And we come to know it's an airplane or aeroplane. So the aeroplane is the invader, which invades the space of the birds, especially here the eagle. So this is E.J. Pratt. E.J. Pratt is known for this kind of merging the space, animal space and the machine space, are the clash of both. So it's more of a turf war. And when we think of a hawk, we can also think of Hamlet. Hamlet's one of his famous words. So when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were sent to spy on Hamlet, Hamlet immediately finds out they are spies. And Hamlet says, I am but mad north-northwest. When the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw. What is its meaning? Simple, he says, you are a handsaw. Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, both of you, you are handsaw. What is a handsaw? And how does it differ from a hawk? A bird, it's a being, and a bird is majestic, a hawk. It has a mind of its own. It can make a decision of its own. Whereas you have a handsaw, which needs someone to act upon it, right? It doesn't have a mind of its own. It's more of a puppet. So that's what Hamlet is implying. A Guildenstern, you are just a puppet in the hands of King Claudius. So I'm aware of that. Okay, so that's how. So symbolically, he's conveying the message. And when we think of birds, we always remember this guy, Icarus. The Greek myth. In Greek mythology, we have this famous character Icarus, whose father Daedalus, and they try to escape and with wax wings. And Daedalus, the matured artist, gives a warning to his son Icarus. Icarus, you should not go too near to the sun or too near to the ocean because you will fall. The ocean may suck you in or the sun may melt your wings. But we have Icarus, and Icarus, once he gets the wings, it's not wings of poesy, but wings of wax, made of wax. He goes to the sun and he flies towards the sun, and it's melted. It gets melted and he dies. Then it gets positive connotation or negative connotation. Positive connotation, Icarus stands for ambition. Icarus stands for passion. You have to go after your dreams, no matter what. Another connotation, it's your pride. Because your pride, you're going to fall. So let's look at two poems which represent that. So we have Chethu's Crow, C-R-O-W. So it's more of a fable here. He decided to attack it. He represents crow, it represents the sun here. He decided to attack it and defeat it, but the sun brightened, and crow returned charred black. So that's how crow became black. So that's his fall because of its pride. Next, the famous allusion we have in Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. So in Dr. Faustus, we have this kind of a symbol. Dr. Faustus is compared to Icarus. Both are known for their vanity. So his waxen wings did mount above his reach. So here we are talking about Dr. Faustus, but the lines allude to Icarus. All right. And when we think of Icarus and Daedalus, we also think of a novel where we have Stephen Daedalus, and we have this famous novel, A Portrait of the Artist as an Young Man, right, by James Joyce. Similar problem, whether Stephen Daedalus, like G.M. Hopkins, whether he's going to be a priest or a poet, whether he's going to be a matured artist like Stephen Daedalus, or the fall of Icarus or Stephen Daedalus. So that's the open ending of that novel. We'll go to the next one. And when we think of birds, we also think of Byzantium by the Irish poet W.B. Yeats. And in this poem, we have an old man, in the earlier poem, sailing to Byzantium. Now he has reached Byzantium, the ideal city, but the city is not perfect. We have drunkards, we have prostitutes, we have other dead souls, is impure, is yet to be pure, now yet to be cleansed. So what happens here in Byzantium? Your soul is cleansed of impurity, then you travel on dolphins to the another city, right? So this is more of a stopping point. It's not the end. Byzantium is not the end, is not the final destination. It's only a stop. From this place, your soul is cleansed. You go through fire, like Buddha's fire. You are cleansed and you go to the next stage. So that is Byzantium. So in this city, we have everything is seems perfect, but no, it's not perfect. But anyway, there is one thing that is crafty. We have miracle, bird or golden handiwork. More miracle than bird or handiwork, planted on the starlit golden bough. So we have a golden bird here, and the golden bird represents artist or perfection of in art, right? So that's the symbol we have here, and it's craft or any craftsman or craftswoman it represents. Then when we think of birds, we think of this little bird, hermit thrush. So many poets have represented thrush. We have Thomas Hardy and his poem, The Darkling Thrush, D-A-R-K-L-I-N-G, Darkling Thrush. So in this poem, the thrush is a symbol of hope. The poem is similar to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. There is no hope. Everything is barren. Europe is barren. But there is only one hope, and that is the thrush. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt, and small, in blast beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So gloom is a despair. So there is only one hope, and we hear the music from thrush. Then again, we hear music in a sense, Ted Hughes' poem, Thrushes. Now the poet wonders how tiny a bird, we have a thrush here, but in this little head, it has a Mozart's brain. Mozart's brain had it because Mozart, the famous musician, is known for coming up with original music. And here is a bird which has Mozart's brain, maybe Ilayaraja's brain or A.R. Rahman's brain, our Madras Mozart. Then in Whitman's poem, Walt Whitman's poem, the American poet, it is an elegy. When lilacs lost in the dooryard bloomed. So in this poem, thrush is more symbol of mourning the death of Abraham Lincoln. Solitary the thrush, the hermit withdrawn to himself, avoiding the settlements, sings by himself a song. So nature is mourning for the death of Abraham Lincoln, and nature is represented by thrush here.